Wonderful. Hopefully everybody's clicked okay to that. Fantastic. So Marah, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm delighted that it's not a horrendous time of the morning or night for you, which is what we sometimes get with our overseas speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Marah is a Christian Palestinian born and raised in Nazareth. She is currently studying a PhD in theology at Princeton Theological Seminary in the USA, and I know she's very recently moved there. The last few years, she's been on a mission to mobilize Palestinian youth and is active in various movements, including Christ at the Checkpoint and others you may have heard of, to encourage critical thinking and active work amongst the younger generation towards a just future in the land. She's interested in bringing her faith and her passion together for justice through her career, and particularly likes to emphasize and look at theology and women in Palestine. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Marah. Thank you very much. And we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you for the warm welcome, Charlotte. I'm very glad and very happy to have been invited to speak here. I think the topic is also challenging for me. Although when we speak about sumud, many people think of a straightforward answer, but the more that I sat down and I reflected, I realized that it's not easy to speak about sumud in the daily life of Palestinians. So for today, I wanted to give you a bit of a background that comes from my personal story, growing up in the church and among the Christian community, and slowly understanding what's going on in Palestine, and then connect it to sumud. So I'd like to speak to you about what sumud looks like in its various forms, if you want to say, if you try to categorize sumud, to speak about sumud among Christians, sumud amongst Palestinian women, and sumud from the perspective or the lives of the young Palestinian citizens of Israel in Nazareth. And then connect it back to Jesus and God. And what does that sumud mean in Christian language to us today? So, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Growing up, I was taught that as a Christian, I am called to be a peacemaker. I was taught that showing love means turning the other cheek to our enemies. In almost every church I went to, and the different schools I went to that were Christian, we were taught to forgive others, and that was the highest priority. And not to fight back evil, because that's not the calling of the church. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. What we should do is maintain the peace, whatever peace we have. We should maintain the calmness. We should maintain the silence that we have in our daily life, because God assigns the rulers on earth. God allows them to govern, even if God does not assign them. And ultimately, God will condemn and judge those who do evil things in our days, at the day of judgment. Therefore, as Christians, we should not worry about all of this on earth. However, with the years passing by, and specifically, it began basically in high school when I met Palestinians from East Jerusalem and the West Bank. I feel like this crowd here knows Palestine more or less. So you would know that as Palestinian citizens, as the Israeli citizens, we don't really have the capacity or the option to meet with Palestinians from East Jerusalem and the West Bank on a daily basis. And that was the first meeting point for me in high school. And then my Palestinian identity started to form and transform. And after that, in university, I went to an Israeli university, to Tel Aviv University, to study sociology. So I was taught to think critically, but at the same time, started to understand what was going on politically, both in the Israeli and the Palestinian communities, while the systematic violence against Palestinians was on the rise as well. And I remember the first year of university, I just had so much anger. I was furious. I was furious at the church for its corruption and compromise, with the occupation, talking and speaking and getting money from Christian Zionists. So the church was basically taking part in the oppression of Palestinians. And these groups are trying basically to eliminate our presence in the land using biblical texts. And this made me very angry as a Christian. I was also angry at our leaders, both in the church and in the state, for not standing up against injustice. And from the Palestinian community, they were oppressing also communities that don't follow the heteropatriarchal norms. So be it queer people, the women who just want to be independent, like me as well. I was angry at my Israeli friends who were very apathetic to our suffering as people. I remember in 2014 at call it the Gaza war, but it was horrible. And my friends just continued saying that Israel needs to protect itself. So they were very apathetic at our suffering, even if it was in a democratic state. So I was really at a crisis. Like, how can I simply accept to turn the other cheek and not do anything about it? I felt something was missing from the good news. How is it good news while we as Palestinians live under oppression, infused and supported somehow by biblical texts? And the responses I received from the church were not satisfying this turmoil in my soul. I was desperately in need for answers, and I refused to accept this passive Christianity I was taught. The Christianity that does not care for the sick, the widow, the poor, the orphans, the oppressed. One that does not care for me and my family and my people. And then in 2018, I was introduced to a group of Palestinian Christians that we used to go by the name Christ at the Checkpoint Young Adults. Now it's a different name. But these people came from different walks of life, different ages, and they shared the same passion to rectify our Christian life, our theology from the colonial past that we had. So alongside this community, and after so much discussions, so many visits to different communities, I learned that practicing perseverance of faith is to practice sumud in Palestine. And to have hope is to live in a state of sumud. And sumud, maybe you've heard this term before or not, it's becoming more of a trend in the academia especially. So sumud in Arabic is the word that means steadfastness or perseverance. It has been translated to other terms as well, but generally speaking, those are the meanings. And it means the daily Palestinian effort to exist or to remain in the land, be it as a strategy or just a way to fight off Israeli colonialism and apartheid. So, and sumud, if we think about it in Christian language, it's the daily tactic to persevere in the faith, to show the witness of the gospel of Jesus in Palestine. And sumud is what the church needs in Palestine. From the Palestinian language and the Christian language, it needs to be in sumud, to shine the light of Jesus and justice and truth. And now I would like to talk about sumud among Christians as first. And with time and reflection, I've realized that it's so significant that sumud looks different and correspondent to the positionality within the Palestinian community. So sometimes sumud can look very different depending who we're talking about and depending on the circumstances and the struggles. And I think that's why I call it the state of sumud. It's not just one action, one type of category of actions. So once we look at it as a state of life, we can identify and appreciate God's work within the community. So among Palestinian Christians, practicing sumud in the daily life is basically to do one's best to sustain life and to be able to stay in the land, fighting all of the disadvantages we face as Palestinians. Now, the Christian community, generally speaking, were better off than other communities. So we don't live in the same status of poverty as others, like Muslims, for example. So our sumud basically means supporting different communities. It means supporting different institutions, like educational institutions like schools or hospitals, and to raise our kids with an ability to dream for a better life. That's the best sumud we can do. And the sumud among Christian leaders, if you know any, in my opinion, is resembled in serving the community, both with generosity, but it's also with the work of advocacy they do abroad, be it with Kairos, Global Kairos for Justice, Christ at the Checkpoint, Sabeel, and other institutions, where the work of advocacy is also a form of sumud. And I personally love that there's a new wave of theology of liberation and contextual theology in Palestine, and it is a very important aspect of sumud among Christians. So to be able to really think about what liberation means, how we can relate the message of the gospel to the majority of Palestinians, it is very crucial to the survival of the Christian community in the land. And to interpret the scriptures in light of Palestinian life helps Christians live out the message of hope. And as an example, I would like to highlight the Nassar family, that might be called the Tent of Nations, you might have heard of it, as a real embodiment of sumud and the gospel in Palestine. So the Tent of Nations, as you can see in the pictures, is owned by the Nassar family, a Palestinian Christian family who have been living in their lands for generations. And their farm is surrounded by illegal settlements. If you go there, you would see on different hilltops, different settlements. And these settlements are building closer and closer to the farm. And both the Israeli settlers and the occupation forces have been constantly pressuring the Nassar family to leave, either to sell their land or to just run away by burning their farms, because they sit on the strategic hill that's surrounding by settlements. And their property has been damaged numerous times, all the time, either by settlers or by soldiers. And lately, some Palestinians are doing that as well. They're trying to take some of the lands by pressuring them and intimidating them. But despite all of the pressure, the Nassar family refuses to leave their rightfully owned land. They continue to cultivate it and warmly host any visitors. You can see the picture on the right. Actually, that's my group of people. We were also very warmly hosted by them to help them cultivate the land. Specifically, we visited them after some Palestinian families went into their farm and burned the different houses that they had within the farm. So we went there to help them clean up the floors and get all the furniture out. But what they do, how they live, is a true act of sumud. They exhibit steadfastness through simple things in the face of immense oppression, violence, and hopelessness. So Dawood Nassar, as you can't see his face, but he's in the picture. He's one of the family owners, and he says that he refuses to leave or retaliate violently because of his Christian faith. I was astonished to hear how he believes. He believes in blessing all neighbors, even when he's so angry and when they're really, really evil against him. He says that we should always bless them. And instead of fighting back with evil, he perseveres with non-violence, with peace, with love, with opening up his farm and have visitors there. And the whole family, they're spreading the message of hope and the gospel in Palestine like nobody else. And I think that's a very wonderful way to stay in sumud. And similarly to the Nassar family, Palestinian women are a great example for what sumud looks like. Historically, and until today, women are great leaders in the community. We just, for some reason, don't identify them as such. If we look at the first Intifada, the women in Beit Sahur specifically have led the Intifada with great resilience and non-violence. The women were among the committee leaders in each neighborhood. They led the meetings, they guided the community in resisting the Israeli occupation, all in non-violent forms. So what the women decided that they should set up local farms within each neighborhood. There's a piece of land. The women cultivated that, and they went through shifts to cultivate the land in order to have produce, in order to sustain the community. In addition, they have started local schools within each neighborhood. One woman would open up their house. They will have the kids come from the neighborhood, and they will continue teaching them to continue their education while the schools were shut during the Intifada. So women are extraordinary leaders of the community, and their work is one of the strongest of sumud. In the daily life, we see women, they do all of the invisible work, be it giving birth to kids, raising the kids, doing all the job at home, working, cleaning, making food, but they now also work outside of the house. So they just do everything. And that's great sumud. And without women's sumud in this patriarchal society, no man, and I tell you for sure, no man can be doing what they're doing now, including our leaders. And a great example of nowadays Palestinian women I would like to highlight is the Masafir Yatta women. The Masafir Yatta is an area of southern Hebron Hills. It's an area full of Bedouin communities that were refugees in 1948. And nowadays, the Israeli army has declared that this area is a closed military training zone, and they've been trying to displace the community and kick them out of their lands. So they're not allowed to build, they're not allowed to have electricity, they're not allowed to even use the water wells that they have. But the women there are amazing, like against all odds and the impossibility of life there, doing all of the invisible work and cooking for the family and living under a very patriarchal society. The women there, in addition to all of that, have started a business, a shared business among the different villages, where the women in their free time, they would make handcrafts and they would sell them. And now they have an organization that represents women in Masafir Yatta. So these women have a lifestyle full of sumud. But this sumud is honestly out of necessity to survive. So we see that the sumud of some of the Christian community, it might be out of passion, it might be out of theological reasoning. Some people they live sumud because this is the only means necessary to life. They don't have any other option. But now I will share with you a kind of sumud that comes out of also passion, but also out of a need for social life. So in Nazareth, in my hometown, as a city, it's marginalized by the Israeli government. So the amount of budgeting we get for the municipality is much lower than the different Israeli cities where Jews live. But we also suffer from corruption within our municipality, that the leaders, they steal the money, or they don't do the work that they should be doing. And in the Unity Uprising in 2021, specifically in May, young people from Nazareth came together in the old market in order to make life more bearable in Nazareth. So in Nazareth, I can tell you from experience, there are no public spaces we can meet at that is not a restaurant, and that is not a house of someone. The municipality does not provide any, there are no parks, there are no public spaces we can just sit there and hang out. So this group of young Palestinians that now come together under the name Label Move have decided to revive the old market and provide spaces for young Palestinians to hang out and to have activities. So they do that with great sacrifice. I don't know if you know, but renovations cost so much, especially when it's in old buildings. So this organization, they choose one shop at a time, and they renovate the space on their own expense and their free labor, so they can host young people there. And after they're done with the space, they will gift basically the space to a small business or to a new artist. So they don't have to bear the costs of renovating a place to rent. And then they would move to a different place and renovate that. So slowly, one stop at a time, they're renovating the old market in Nazareth. And this is sumud, against the Israeli oppression as citizens in the state. And honestly, meeting this group of people every time brings me hope. So coming back to my journey, and having been learning about oppression, how that looks like among different communities in Palestine, and specifically in 2021, I was so angry. I was so brokenhearted. And this led me to realize that suffering is actually very real. It's a very real thing. And very quickly, I started lamenting our lives, that we were supposed to live this broken life, and we were supposed to live it with this broken heart. And there's no amount of joy can cover up the darkness of living in colonization. And with time and with serious reflection, I understood that sumud does not always mean good things. We might celebrate sumud, but sometimes we just do it without any energy. There's no conviction to persevere, we just have to. And sumud many times will be in the form of lament. It will be simply in tears and despair. And sometimes it will be just small actions to serve the community, like giving a cup of water to a Palestinian who their house has just been demolished by Israelis. And I think it is difficult to live a life of sumud. And many times we don't have the words or the theory to describe or articulate what we choose and why we choose it consciously or unconsciously. But coming back to Nazareth and to Jesus reading from the scroll of Isaiah at the synagogue, he did preach the good news of the kingdom of God, a kingdom that holistically cares for the well-being of all humans, interested in both the personal and the systematic sin. And the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ and his kingdom is found today in sumud. To see Jesus in the faces of all these oppressed people, of the crucified people of history, is to also identify with those who don't have a voice, and to look at the margins to find the Spirit of God in action. But every day we still appeal, "Wainaki Allah," which means, "Where are you, God?" And every day we learn again how to love our enemies in a justice-oriented love, one that flips tables and shakes up the Roman Empire. Every day we learn the hardship of the cross and the need to stand tall in the face of the apartheid wall. And with each murdered Palestinian body in cold blood, with each marginalized woman, with each child incarcerated in administrative detention, which destroys the dignity of life early on, which each forcibly displaced community, I need to remind myself and others that God hears our cry. However, in all honesty, the difficulty of the journey is not hearing back from the Creator. Like sometimes, even believing in a crucified Jesus in the darkest of moments is not enough. And we really ask, where is God's justice? And when we read that in scripture, God cares about justice, where is it? But that is when sumud in its small forms meets these questions: to live daily carrying the cross, to remain steadfast against all systems of violence, and to not abandon our neighbors is the best that we can do. Not to immigrate, not to stay in the US as in my situation, to go back. So as Palestinians, we will live and we will stay. And we will do our best. That sometimes looks very bad and sometimes it makes sense to us. But I think when it comes to hope or to our hope in God, I'd like to highlight some points from a statement that the Christ at the Checkpoint Young Adults issued in 2021 that keeps me, it keeps me sane, basically. It reminds me of what we do here. The first point, which was very important to me, that the anger of Palestinians is a holy rage. It's a righteous anger. And Palestinians are angry, just like I am. We're angry about the political leadership being complicit in this oppression. And Palestinians are angry because of the apartheid system and injustice. So anger is not necessarily a bad thing. And the second point, that we shouldn't fall into the trap of equating all violence as the same. There's violence and dominance perpetrated by the system, and there's a violence of the oppressed reacting to the system. And that we should take a firm stance against all unjust systems instead of adopting this neutrality and simply condemning all violence as equal. The third point is that prayer for peace is not enough. We should not call for peace that basically returns us to the status quo of inequality, but we should pray for a transformative peace that is based with justice and reconciliation. And that words and our prayers without action, seriously, without action, they're empty. There's no meaning to pray if we're not ready to do the work that it demanded. And to find hope in our despair as Christians, we have to repent our passiveness. As I said, we're more better off than other communities. We have the option to run away if we want to. And as a community as a whole, we have been passive as a church body in the land. As a Palestinian church, we have been passive towards injustice. And we need to seek to unite forces with people who have the same goals, the goal towards peace that promotes justice. And to be honest, I'm seeking theological training just because of this, because of the remaining questions that I still have and other Palestinian theologians have not yet answered sufficiently. But I'm very, very grateful I can do this among a community of Jesus followers who we start, like, if we look at the church, we're at the margins of the church, but we still want to stay in the margins. We still want to focus on the margins and help one another not be tempted by the money or the positions of power that we might get in the future. So to persevere, to stay in sumud, is to hold up our heritage as Palestinians, which makes us true Christians in the land. And we have a double-edged message to our neighbors, one of good news to the downtrodden, but it's one of judgment and accountability to those in power. And if Jesus was with us today, he would have so many tables to flip. That in itself is sumud. And my hope is in God, who gave the younger generation the opportunity to do the work that we do, have the spaces that we have, and support one another in the context of oppression. And this is how we're supposed to follow Jesus in Palestine. And that is sumud. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Marah. Oh, so much food for thought. Yeah, just so many exciting, wonderful examples of sumud. I think it's, really interesting to look at it from different angles. And I'm sure people have got some questions about some of that, because I think quite a lot of us have perhaps had one perspective on sumud, which you've blown out the water, which is wonderful, because that's what we're here to be challenged and here to have our thoughts shaped and help to be shaped by those of you living in these challenging circumstances. Just to say, we're just going to stop the recording now. Thank you for being with us if you've watched this online, and please do join us again for our next part, which will be on the 1st of October. Thank you, Lynn, if you can stop that.